Hi, I'm Eric Benfeld with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia Tech, and I'm for the soil, both for my children and future generations, viable agriculture, local waterways, and the protection of natural resources. Thank you for being part of this conversation and the For the Soil podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and when I say special episode, this time I mean it. It's a special episode because coming up on Sunday, December the 5th, is World Soil Day, and the purpose of World Soil Day is to draw attention to the importance of healthy soils. Well, we just thought that was right up our alley, so we thought we would do a special episode, extended episode, if you will, with very special guests. Our guest today will be Mary Sketch with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition and also Ira Wallace. Ira Wallace is with the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange in Louisa County, Virginia, and she is a magnificent person, just a person I could talk to all day long. She has a wealth of information about healthy soils, and she'll be joining us in just a few minutes. But first of all, this being a special edition of For the Soil Conversation, we wanted to bring in Mr. Terry Cosby. Terry is chief of the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I had the opportunity outside the podcast to talk with Terry Cosby about the importance of soil health in the United States. I'm hosting a brand new podcast that has been coordinated by, NRCS and Virginia Tech, Virginia State University, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and it's called For the Soil, and it's all about soil health. And I'd like to get your comment on the importance, the big picture, the overall importance of soil health in the United States. Where do we stand, and how can we improve the health of our soil?
You know, that's a very important question. And throughout my career, we at NRCS, we have an 80-year history. And so soils is the backbone of everything that we do. And I tell folks, especially you employees coming into the agency, you got to understand the soils and the capability of the soils, because that's what sustains us as Americans, and we need everyone to understand that. And so you got to have those building blocks when it comes to soil health. And it just like any living organism, just like your body, if you don't take care of it, there's some things catastrophic things that could happen to you. Soils are no different, and so we have to take care of them. We have to look at the makeup, the characteristics. Every soil is different, whether it's formed on the timber or a prairie or wherever. We understand these soils, and we have some great folks across this country that's working on this. And we understand that sometimes you gotta rest it, sometimes you gotta diversify, and you can't abuse it. And so soil health is so important to the viability of this country.
That is perfect. We'll weave that into the podcast, and I do greatly appreciate your time. And that was just a brief portion of my conversation with the chief of the USDA's NRCS, Mr. Terry Cosby, as he talked about the importance of soil health. Now let's go to the show. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee. Mary, we have a special guest with us today who I think our listeners are really going to enjoy. She was a guest on my television program, Virginia Farming, several years ago, and I distinctly remember walking away from that conversation thinking, I could have talked with that lady all day long. She is a fascinating person and has a lot to share when it comes to nutrition, organic farming, soil health. Mary, I'm going to let you do the honor of introducing our special guest today.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, we're so grateful to have Ira Wallace with us today, and she's a writer, educator, seed saver, and really the energy behind the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, and is also a part of the acorn community in Louisa, Virginia. And just so excited, she's an incredible storyteller and in the power of narrative. And so just excited to hear from you today, Ira. And I'm going to kick it over to you to hear a little bit about, to start, what is seed saving and why does soil health matter?
Well, golly, two big questions. We think seed saving matters on the farm and garden level because it gives individual farmers, people in local communities, more control over the genetics of the plants that are going to make their farms and gardens thrive. It was not that long ago, I mean, when I was a little girl, that most people saved some seeds who were serious gardeners. And, by the time I was an adult, that had moved over to companies. Not that, even 100 years ago, everyone saved all their seeds, but they saved ones that were really important to them.
Well, in Ira, I think we're moving towards winter right now and all that comes with that. And so it'd just be interested in what you're doing on your land to steward your soils in this season, and how do we address the 4 principles of soil health as we move into the winter?
Well, one thing is leave no soil bare. We try to have crops, cover crops, or some kind of mulch, or even an intentional fallow that has living plant material covering all the soils. And we also try to turn under vegetative material and have that nutrients from that go into those cover crops before we put them in. A new thing that we're doing is occultation, covering with tarps. So we take an area and take all the material that's living and just cover it and have it die and turn into the soil during the fall and winter time.
What about organic matter? Should we, as gardeners, as farmers, be adding organic matter to the topsoil? And if I'm a farmer on 300 acres of peanuts, how do I add organic matter?
Well, we think having, an increased soil organic matter, like 5%, for example, you would be like going, whoa, look at that, because it just helps so much. It helps in nutrient availability. It helps with moisture retention. It helps when you have too much water with being able to cycle that through without, taking away the nutrients that are there. So I kind of joke when I'm telling gardeners, I say, there's hardly anything that's wrong in your garden that a little added organic matter wouldn't hurt. And you can do that. You can add that by taking living material from the garden and recycling it, by putting it in, by having biological mulches that are going to break down and go into the soil, by growing cover crops. We say anytime in the summer you have your soil open more than 5 weeks, you can throw some buckwheat in there and add enough organic matter to make a difference. And in the winter, when your garden is sleeping, if you aren't like us and throw so many greens in there that you have to fight between the cover cropping and the greens growing, but all of that organic matter. And we also have taken to trying tree debris, shredded bark, well, not so much bark, but especially small limbs, really add to it.
One other comment, Mary, I'll turn it back over to you. Ira, I have to tell the story about the Carwile peanut, because every time I see your beautiful face and I read the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, I think of Frank Carwile, who was a peanut grower in Southwest Virginia. Now, all of our listeners are going to recognize that Southwest Virginia is not the place to grow peanuts in the Old Dominion. It's traditionally over in the south side and the more sandier soils. But back in the 1930s, Frank Carwile developed a peanut for growing in heavy soils west of the Blue Ridge. And the only place I could find that seed stock was your organization, Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. And I've been growing that peanut, that variety of peanuts, for 17 years now. And they just continue to get better and better and better. I love reading your catalog. There's so many stories in your catalog. I mean, you can look up the page on collards, just on collard greens, and there's story after story after story after story about heirloom collard varieties.
Yeah, well, we think a good seed will, speak for itself, but a good story will get people to investigate, like you did with Frank Carwile's peanut, that story, and see how it is in your garden. It's very important. If you didn't hear the story, you wouldn't know that this is likely to do better for you in heavier mountain soils, for example. And collards. Don't get me going on collards.
Let's get her going on collards, Mary, because I remember the story. I remember the story you told about discovering more than 90 varieties of heirloom collards in a recent study that you were involved with.
Yes, we are still involved with the heirloom collard project. Actually, we're going to do a meeting to talk about how we can get people even more excited about collards in a couple of weeks in North Carolina with our colleagues there from the Utopian Seed Project. Ed Davis, who was one of the authors of this book's Collard, A Southern Tradition from Seed to Table. And he, two things happened in the same year. I met him, got introduced to his book, and I was going to Charleston, and I went to the ARAC there, where they happened to be doing a trial of 60 of the 90 accessions that Davis and Morgan had put in the USDA gene bank from their cultural geographers project, collecting heirloom collards from seed savers all over the Southeast. And of course, here at Southern Exposure, this is what we're all about, saving varieties. So we got together with the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa and got 60 of those variety seeds of them. And both here in Virginia and in Iowa, we did trials of them and trying to maintain this diversity in collards, curly ones, blue ones, purple ones, shiny ones. They are so
my favorite is the Alabama blue.
Yes.
We've been growing that for several years now.
It's lovely, and it's small enough that if you don't have a huge garden, you can fit in a good amount in your bed as well.
And Ira, changing gears a little bit, but I would be interested, I know that you're very involved really in these intersection of land ethic and environmental justice and social justice, and where you see that intersection specifically around soil health and being stewards for current and future generations.
Oh my goodness. Well, there are so many ways that this intersects. One that, isn't exactly on the topic, but land ownership. There's been a tremendous amount of Black land loss, and having young Black farmers be able to own land, parents said that they were trying to take soil and have better soil that goes to their grandchildren than the soil that they had been given to begin with, and that are reaching out to small farmers, because those are where the limited resource farms are, is these small farms, that they're not the people who have great big tractors and so forth. And so many of these hand cultivation, low tillage methods fit right into someone who has under 5 or 10 acres farm. I think, as I say, helping small farmers to be owners of the land, not just renters, so they have lots of skin in the game is really important.
And just one last question for me, Ira, is any book or resource or podcast recommendations for our listeners that have inspired you either in this moment or over the years?
Oh, well, this is funny. This is really a Gardner reference, and it's not so much a Southerner, but Margaret Roach has a podcast called A Way to Garden, and I have really enjoyed that. That's kind of a fun one that I enjoy a lot.
Very interesting. What was the name of that podcast?
It's called A Way to Garden by Margaret Roach.
You're listening to a special edition of For the Soil, a Conversation, a special edition because World Soil Day is coming up on Sunday, December the 5th. Let's now go to some of the conversation after the show.
I just heard about so many of the wonderful stories. I'm glad we got some of the collard stories in there because Jeff was telling me about that before the podcast. But Jeff, any questions that you have specifically?
Yeah, this is just kind of out of curiosity. When you first came to the piece of land that you now call the Acorn community, what was the soil like then as compared to what it's like now? Can you describe that, Ira?
Well, we selected for something that had a pretty good soil profile according to the soil surveys, because we thought we're only going to buy a farm once here, so we better start with that. So that was pretty good. And it had not actually been so much farmed as used for hay production. So it had an okay amount of organic matter, but there were sections of it that were that red clay. And if you go out there now, they're brown. We call it our brown gold. And that is the result of our adding organic material in the almost 30 years we've been here.
I'm curious, how often do you test your soil? And do you use conventional soil testing laboratories, or I suspect you do something on site?
Well, we don't actually have soil tests that often. We used to every other year, when like the first 10 years or so we were here. And we got Mark, oh man, his last name just escaped me.
Schoenbeck
to do some more exotic testing with various labs and tell us things that we should do to build up our soil. And we tried to follow those recommendations. But now we mostly have a regime of a 6-year rotation, trying to have a full year 1 in 6 cover crop regime. And that seems to keep it going pretty good.
Also, I'd like to get your take on some kind of a relatively new phrase we're hearing in agriculture these days. For years, we called it sustainable agriculture, but more and more now I'm hearing the phrase regenerative agriculture. What is your take on, or is there a difference in your opinion?
Between sustainable and regenerative?
Yes, I've heard people expound on that, saying that sustainable agriculture means just kind of keeping what you got. Don't lose soil, but regenerative agriculture is suggesting that you're rebuilding something.
I will not go totally into the argument. We argue with each other about those topics here. Some people feel like we need to totally not just change our agricultural practices, but change our diets so that we're using more foods from sources and so forth. So we have all these trees and bushes and stuff, and are trying to train ourselves to eat differently, not just to grow differently, but to be more seasonal. I mean, you kind of see this in the farmer's market, but this is going beyond that, having, varieties that we just aren't so accustomed to eating, that were either consumed by the native people, or that, say in our case, we have been experimenting with varieties from the African diaspora, which is where in the Southeast, eating dark leafy greens was introduced mostly by enslaved African people. So yeah, I guess we want it to be better in a way that can sustain itself if left, to go fallow, but also ways that what we're taking out is being replaced by the amount of time that we are allowing the soil to regenerate.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. We do like to highlight one of the 4 core principles of soil health in each episode. And today we hear from Dr. Rory McGuire at the College of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech.
Yes, minimize soil disturbance is one of the first things that we worked out when we were looking at conserving soils. After the Dust Bowl was caused by drought, but also caused by the moldboard plow disturbing and destroying soil structure. So when you disturb the soil, you destroy soil structure, and you also burn off organic matter. So minimizing soil disturbance by practices such as no-till, you help build soil structure. When you have good soil structure, water drains properly. You don't have problems with compaction. If you have compactions, your roots can't grow through the soil. Minimizing soil disturbance by not moldboard plowing, doing conservation till or no-till is extremely important.
Also, I'd like to challenge each of our listeners to take a pledge to improve the soil health in your own world, whether it be in a field of winter wheat, a 4-acre tobacco operation, or maybe even in your backyard herb garden. You can take that pledge today by visiting our website at forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. And also remember to subscribe to this podcast so you can stay up to date on soil health issues. Well, Mary and Ira, it has certainly been a pleasure having you on this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Jeff.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you have a specific question about soil health, just contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts and Mr. Ruiz. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.